Welcome to the Team Teach podcast. I'm Clare, and in each episode you'll find me talking with an expert guest to learn more about behaviour. We squeeze a lot into each episode. You'll listen to the latest thinking in behaviour, continue your professional development with our book recommendation, and then I'll send you away with 3 practical tips you can use in your setting. I'm joined today by Dave Smallwood. Dave is a Principal Team Teach trainer and Company Director of Sense Training and Consultancy. He's worked in special schools for both the local authority and for the National Autistic Society. As a staff development coordinator for the National Autistic Society, he's also delivered and developed training in autism, equality, diversity and rights. Dave is also an occasional co-host of the Team Teach podcast. And today, Dave and I are talking about reducing low-level disruptive behaviour. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Dave. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Claire. How are you?
I'm smiling a lot because we've been doing a little bit of planning for the episode off air and we've been arguing a lot around this topic. So I think it's going to be a juicy topic for listeners and for us. So we're talking about...
You've been arguing, I've just been talking.
We're going to be talking about on this episode about trying to reduce low-level disruptive behaviours in schools. We're going to start off the episode just with a quick intro for you, Dave, and what you do.
Hi, I'm Dave. I'm a principal trainer for Team Teach. My background is working in education, in the classrooms, in our SEN settings, mainly with young people that have a diagnosis of autism.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. And I am Claire Edmondson, also like Dave, a principal Team Teach tutor. Lots of variance in my background, education like Dave, so pupil referral units, special ed and autism. And I've also worked in mental health provisions and also for an adoption and fostering agencies, supporting parents, carers and families going through that process. So that's me, that's us. And we're going to start off the episode by thinking about what you wish you knew then that you know now about the topic.
Yeah, is that you handing over to me first?
That is, sorry, Dave.
Yeah, okay. What I wish I'd known then that I know now is quite simply, and it's something that people will hear a lot, behaviour is communication. And it's so difficult with these low-level disruptive behaviours that we might see to think of it that way. But still, the children that we're working with in a school setting, if that's where you're working, they're still trying to tell us something. It might not even be that they know what it is, but it's coming from somewhere. And there's something behind it. There's something driving that behaviour. It is annoying. It can be annoying to us. It can annoy me. It can trigger me. I become triggered from these behaviours happening. But just having that thought process that actually they're trying to tell me something, then that just helps me in that moment just regulate myself so that I can give a bit more of a measured response to the situation.
It's such an important message in the training that we run for Team Teach as well around behaviours of communication, but it applies to everything. Even if we're labeling something as low level disruptive behavior, we want to be hearing the message behind it.
Yeah,
my one is
it is the message behind it, and it's not going to solve it. It's not going to solve the low level disruptive behaviors that we get, but what it does, it just gets me into the right frame of mind to address it. Sorry. Over to you, Claire. What's yours?
It's a great segue into me. So I was thinking around when I was doing my teacher's placement in a high school in West London, and I was very inexperienced. And I remember having a group of year 7s who pretty much ate me alive in the behaviour sense. And I didn't know what to do. So I thought, I'll do some class rewards and class consequences. But actually, they were just terrible. And it escalated the low-level behaviour into what, I mean, I don't really label behaviour in the way that we are on this episode, but I think it did escalate it to kind of more disruptive behaviours. So I think that was a really quick learn during my teaching practice around whole class, rewards and consequences. It just doesn't help those low level disruptive behaviors. It just doesn't address it. It might be a holding pen if you do them well. But yeah, it doesn't address, like you said, the kind of underlying things going on and the reasons why. And that was a hard slope, I think, to climb in my teaching practice.
Yeah. But the consequence side of it does sound quite fun, actually, Claire. I wish I was there. But is it because you became the challenge then? So the consequences came, you became the challenge. It's just like just in everyday society, driving, for instance. I mean, I drive at the speed limit everywhere I go, but I believe many people know the consequences for going over the speed limit, and it becomes a little bit of a game, doesn't it? We set our cruise control to 75 and hedge our bets. We know the consequences, but it becomes a little bit of a challenge. Do you think that's the young people, as you push back, they push back towards you?
Yeah, testing where the boundaries lay, new member of staff, trainee, teacher. I mean, it's a recipe for a storm, right? I do think there was a lot of boundary pushing, but also I suppose if I reflect on me as a trainee teacher there, I'm also boundary pushing, trying to understand and navigate systems and things that might help. And all of that, although it was awful, I can still remember some of the lessons there. It was terrible. All of that is kind of rich information to inform the kind of practice that I had later, being like, okay, that didn't work, and not being too hard on myself for trying something new because I'm, inexperienced. So I think, yes, it was boundary pushing, but also trying to find the boundaries with the classes that I taught as well, and trying to find the boundaries around that low level disruptive behavior, like trying to find the zeitgeist, the magic bullet to fix it, which we're going to obviously let the listeners know doesn't exist.
No, it doesn't. But you were going the right way about it. You were pushing and trying different things, and it often doesn't work. But we'll try. We'll keep trying anyway.
Did you know that you can become a trainer and deliver team teach training to staff within your own organisation? Have the flexibility to choose when, where, and who you deliver your training to throughout the year. Find out more about this cost-effective option on the Team Teach website.
What is low-level disruptive behaviour?
Now, I feel quite strongly already about this question that I'm triggered. I really don't like the word triggered either, but I find the term low level disruptive behavior problematic at best, because I don't know what low level disruptive behavior is, because my background's very varied, working in lots of different services. So, for example, if I was working in some of the pupil referral units that I've worked in, I don't think low-level disruptive behaviour really existed, because as staff, we would have to do quite a bit of tactical ignoring. Otherwise, I don't think we would get very much done in our learning. So if I translate that back to the high schools that I've worked in, some quite high-achieving high schools in the southeast, that actually lots of those behaviours that were in the pupil referral unit would have been described as low-level disruptive behaviour. So is it very much in the eyes of the beholder, which I think makes it subjective and problematic?
Yes, I think you're correct in that assumption there. But I think in the pupil referral units, the low-level disruptive behaviours were there. But the strategies for managing those behaviours were just different, weren't they? So you say you had the tactical ignoring in place. So the behaviours were there. Whereas the tactical ignoring probably wouldn't have been the thing in the high achieving high school that you were in, because according to our behaviour policy, it would have to be addressed there and then.
Or I think that maybe we didn't label it as low-level disruptive behaviour. We would label that as behaviours of concern, or being like, oh, is this something to do with my lesson plan or reflecting on the dynamics in the classroom? So lots more reflection as opposed to labeling the difficulty. But that is not to say, you're right, that low-level disruptive behaviour, didn't exist. I think it was the way that it was labelled and marked in that service.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking class to class, practitioner to practitioner, that I've talked about service to service, but I guess for listeners in their service, is everyone in their school labeling low-level disruptive behaviour as the same thing? Do you see what I mean?
I know what you mean. I think the label is the thing that will influence our behaviour.
Mm-hmm.
So if we call it a behaviour of concern, we're going to approach it very differently to if we call it a low-level disruptive behaviour. So it's the label that it's language. Language is a powerful thing, and we perceive behaviour differently with regards to how we label it. And I think that's why sometimes we find it quite difficult, because we get so caught up in that label. It's a low-level disruptive behavior. It's constant, it's consistent, it's continuously happening, and it's happening towards me. And then it's us that start becoming dysregulated with it. If we can change the label or the perception or where we're looking at the behavior from, then we might be able to change our approaches and become more reflective and think, is there anything I can change? Is it something to do with my lesson plan? Can I change that? Can I change my delivery style? And that's a difficult angle for professionals to come from, I think
it is, because I'm playing devil's advocate. I don't necessarily support this idea, because I've tried to be as reflective as possible in my services, but it could be seen when we're shining the light back to practitioners that it can feel blamey, that actually, okay, so this child, let's name what I would consider a low-level disruptive behavior, is calling out a lot and kind of maybe talking over me. And then the focus comes on me as the practitioner, that might feel a bit blaming.
Blame's another one of those words that I'm not keen on. We love to blame someone or something for something. So if I'm not to blame, who is them? But do we have to? We don't have to blame anybody. It's not that we're doing something wrong. It's just that maybe we could do something slightly different. Yes, they might be doing it to purposefully annoy us, and there we could say the children are to blame for it. But as professionals, we should still see the behaviour as a need for support. Just because it's low level and consistent and ongoing doesn't mean it's any different for those behaviours that aren't as frequent, but a lot more volatile. For instance, we still should be seeing them the same way. They're still a behaviour. It's still trying to tell us something. Let's try and figure out what that is. I had an example the other day. Young man in a school, year 3-ish, I think, constantly tapping a pencil, constantly, and calling out the teacher's name constantly. No stopping it. The teacher said, I've tried to ignore him. I just try to ignore him as much as possible, and it just gets worse. So we're back to the tactical ignoring. Now that it's very specific about how we ignore something or somebody. If we ignore the whole, if this young person here is doing everything they can to gain our attention, is ignoring them going to do anything about that? So with best intentions, the staff are trying to do the best things. We're told in a way to ignore, when actually this person's trying to gain attention. So let's give them the attention that they need. whilst also ignoring the undesired behaviour. And we heap praise on the desired behaviours and hopefully cultivate those behaviours instead. So there's ways in which we can ignore. So it's tiny tweaks to the strategies that we're probably already using that are going to help. So the staff aren't to blame. Staff aren't doing things wrong, but let's just like tweak it a little bit.
I think that's a great explanation, because I think sometimes that is where it can sit with practitioners, where behaviour is a communication and then it sort of feels like it's coming right back to us. I was also just thinking about naming the highest percent of exclusions in schools as well. I think that's really helpful for the listener, that persistent disruptive behaviours in the DFE information holds the highest percent of it's not called fixed term exclusions, they're suspensions now, and permanent exclusions in schools. So I think that's really useful to know, that actually when we are trying to address these low level disruptive behaviours, that this alone, if it escalates and continues, can be a reason why a child goes on to get permanently excluded. So I think that is quite heavy information to sit with, and makes it really important that if we're seeing these behaviours develop, that early intervention that you've kind of talked about, or identifying it as someone, telling us through their behaviour that they need extra support. I think that's really important, because the journey, the trajectory with those behaviours, we can see it in the evidence, it can be exclusions, and none of us as practitioners want that. We want to support as much as we can. So I thought that was just a good bit just to nod to and acknowledge. But as you know, Dave, I probably could now talk about that topic for an hour. So I'm being really tight to the topic and making sure
I could as well. I've got my foot on the pedal, trying to press the brakes at the moment.
I know.
I could go on, yeah.
But we actually, what's helpful for both of us to stay on track is actually we do have a topic booked in a month or so, where we're going to look at pupil referral units and exclusion. So that tangent we will definitely visit, because it's something I feel really passionate about. But I think it is useful in the context of this topic to know that can be a trajectory. And I'm also thinking about some of the causes of our low-level disruptive behaviours, or if we're labelling those, in that way, what some of the causes might be, Dave.
I mean, the common things that we're going to see is, I think, attention. When we ask staff what they think, certainly when I'm delivering courses, is the home. The first thing people say is that the family's at home. They're getting no attention at home, or the complete opposite, they're getting way too much attention at home and have control over absolutely everything. So when they come to school, they're constantly trying to figure out a way of gaining the adult's attention for themselves. So that for me is probably the biggest one, or just looking for that rise, looking for a reaction in staff. How far can I push the boundaries before you snap? Sometimes, I suppose, if we're looking at it in the minds of the young people, it can be a fun game to try and play. But it's those reactions. For me, I talk about it quite a lot on courses. It's like, well, how far can I push you before you snap? Because really what I want to do is trust you. And maybe there's people in my life that have let me down, and you're going to leave me just like everyone else. So if I push you loads and you don't snap, then I can start trusting you. I know how far I can push you and where your limits and boundaries lie. So I think searching for reactions and also attention are big ones.
Yeah, they are really big ones. They come up on the courses that I run as staff, kind of feeding back they're where those things lay. I was actually also thinking about some of the causes, but thinking back to me at school, I don't know what you were like at school, Dave. We've never actually really talked about it, but if I like, you were really, I can imagine that actually. Maybe a bit cheeky, but yeah. I I didn't like school. I didn't really enjoy the learning unless it was something that I was interested in. So like drama, PE, like that pretty much was about it. Maybe English as well. And actually the behaviors where I would definitely display low level disruptive behaviors, which were quite common, and I got into a bit of trouble at school, were just the ones that I found boring. They were also the ones where I didn't feel like the teacher particularly liked me. So I was less likely to engage, but also would show low level disruptive behaviors. Interestingly, though, I don't know how you're going to sit with this. The teachers I was scared of, I was very unlikely to show low level disruptive behaviors either. So there's a hot mix, really, of
Oh,
the
there is a
reasons
hot mix.
around me
No,
and
I'm
school.
hoping, I'm really hoping you're not suggesting that we should be scary.
I'm not. I'm just naming that. I definitely. I can remember she was called Dr. Harris. She taught biology. I was petrified. She made me sit at the front. That's a pretty good strategy. And I was scared, yeah, to speak because she would follow through with something. But it wasn't like a carnal fear. Like she was fine. She was maybe pretty cold. But she was also a really good teacher. So maybe I had, some respect for her and the class respected her in some ways. But yeah, there was a sense of fear. So I'm not suggesting that that is a way forward. I'm just sort of naming that I remember that in school.
I think there's something to be said for having
Mm,
clear limits and clear
yeah,
boundaries and being
yeah.
firm and possibly strict, but that
Mm,
needs to be balanced out with um, a certain amount of care. I mean, those teachers that were strict, but also would invest a little bit of time and talk to you as well after the lesson or something. They're the ones that you really like. You knew where the limits were.
mm,
You were a little bit scared of them, but you could go to them and say, "Actually, Miss, I'm a bit upset. This has just happened." And they say, "Okay, well, come on, let's come and have a sit down and we'll have
yeah,
a talk about it."
yeah.
So they had that personable side to them as well.
Yeah, that connection, Dave, isn't it? So as we were both talking there, I was thinking actually this is for me more about the connection with the teacher and the subject to an extent. But even if I didn't like the subject that much, if the teacher was boundaried, but I kind of liked them as well, respected them probably is a better word, then yeah, that I was all right. But I'm also thinking about my time in like mainstream, special ed, and PRUs. And actually, the behaviors, low level disruptive behaviors that I would see as a teacher, I think my experience is that often it would be a signal of there being some learning need being masked. And that's a topic that we talked about recently, wasn't it? Talking about masking behaviors, but where individuals that maybe were less confident, particularly in core subjects like literacy and maths, would to disrupt the scrutiny on their learning. So that's been a feature across all of the services that I've worked in. And I think the young people and children that I've worked with worrying about what their peers would think of their learning and practitioners. And also some individuals that I've worked with in mainstream where they just don't really quite follow the societal norms and find it very hard to be quiet in the times where we're supposed to and are quite impulsive. And that impulsivity, that chat back to some practitioners would be low level disruptive behaviors. But when we look a bit deeper, we kind of see that this person is at the moment unable to impulse control. So calling out when they're not supposed to. And then I've seen that feels quite frequent as well. And then lastly, I think from me on this question, actually, particularly with teenagers, just some like teenagers just being teenagers, just being interested in their peers and not that interested in school, and kind of, that's kind of where they were at. And so labeling it in a different way of just being like, cool, okay, this is this is just teenage behavior going on, and we can work through this, as long as I have that connection with the class and the individuals, that I can work through that in quite an adult way as a teacher. So that's kind of, some of my bits.
Yeah. Someone said to me the other day on a course, it was in a secondary school. Well, they're almost adults. They should know better. But they are teenagers.
Yeah.
They are. You're absolutely right. They are teenagers. And even as adults, we don't know better.
No, we don't. But I'm also thinking like primary schools though as well. Like I was talking about teenagers there, but when in primary schools, when like the biggest kids get to year 6, you get this like kind of, little shuffle going on where it just shifts a bit, doesn't it? We're top of the school, and you might get some disruptive behaviors kind of just based on that shift. It's transitions, changes. So, Dave, I'm thinking that we should do some top tips about the things that are going to help with low-level disruptive behaviour. Because I'm thinking it didn't really come up in our discussions so much, but I do think effective staff training, and I think sometimes behaviour support training is a bit limited in teacher training. I don't want to say for all teacher training providers, but my experience limited is that there is perhaps not enough. So I do think having effective staff training around supporting behaviour, having that as part of a core part of teacher training, having it repeated in our primary, early years secondary provisions would really help it. So I think sometimes there's just a lack of knowledge around it. So that was kind of what I was thinking for my tip.
Mine are about us investing time to build relationships with people. Just finding that little bit of time at the start of an academic year in September. If we invest a little bit of time and get to know a person, not to sit with them and try and figure out why they're tapping a pencil on the table and calling out when they shouldn't be calling out, but finding out what they like to do at weekends and what park they like to go to, and just getting to know them, and that'll build relationships and rapport with the young person. And then the other one, I've actually got 3, so I'm going to get the third one wrapped into this one as well. I think for those low-level disruptive behaviours that do have a little bit of attention-seekingness about them, get them involved as quickly as you possibly can. So as soon as they walk through the door, it's, "Hi, Daniel. Oh, come over here. I've got something that I need you to do. Can you just hold this for me? I'm going to start the lesson. When I need the page turn, you turn it. I'll give you a nod, and then you turn the page for me." Kind of not giving them time to think. And it's quite high energy, but get them involved as quick as possible. Give them some responsibility, some jobs. And with that as well, with the giving the attention, work in a bit of time with them and have it scheduled so they know when they're getting the time. Always know exactly when they're getting the time with you, and try not to let them down with it. So if they have their time with you, maybe twice a day to start with, thick and fast, quite a lot. Over time, you can start bringing that down, but always make sure that you give them that time. Never let them down. That's it.
Good job, Dave. You wrapped them into one, which I thought you were going to try and demand an extra top tip, which would upset me greatly.
No, I wrapped them up nicely, like a little bit of a Christmas present.
That was beautiful. No, thank you so much for your time, Dave. That was a really interesting topic, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Claire. Take care.
You've been listening to the Team Teach podcast. It's been great to have you here with us as we discuss behaviour, communication, and the ways we can best support those in our care. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.